If you think RecOps is just scheduling interviews, you know what? You're about to have your mind blown.
I got into recruiting about 9 years ago. And at the time, that was when RecOps first really started to be talked about.
So stick around because Jeremy and I, we dig into one of the biggest challenges facing RecOps right now and why so few people are actually talking about it.
And then a lot of leadership teams that really want to bring recruiting operations people in also don't understand how to grow us.
From career paths to AI tools, this is everything that you didn't know but you need to know about RecOps and what's in the future. This is Trent Cotton, your host of The Human Capitalist. Get ready, buckle up, and let's dig in. All right, welcome back to the Human Capitalist Podcast. I'm your host, Trent Cotton, and today I have the king of all knowledge whenever it comes to RecOps, Mr. Jeremy Lyons. How you doing, Jeremy?
I'm doing all right, Trent. I don't know if I would say I'm the king. I know people who I would call the king, but maybe I'm in the court. Maybe it's like homecoming, like one of the princes or whatever.
Or the jester?
Oh, definitely the jester.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. Just for the audience, I think that you and I have kind of determined that we can't sit next to each other in any kind of a conference setting because we'll get kicked out for laughing.
You know what? Yeah, but I also think that we're the people you want to sit next to just to laugh a little, and we just have to tell
Oh,
us
yeah.
like if we're not laughing at you, we're
No.
totally making fun of ourselves in this. But yeah.
Yes. No, totally. Well, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about your background and RecOps Collective?
Sure. So, background on me, I am second generation recruiting. I've My mother was an executive recruiter. I got into recruiting about 9 years ago. And at the time, that was when RecOps first really started to be talked about um, outside of just specific circles. And started as an RC, fell in love with the systems, fell in love with the process, uh, worked with some amazing brands, some amazing people, learned a lot of what I need to know. And about 3 years ago, I started RecOps Collective as a way to help the recruiting operations community, basically ensuring that we had information that didn't look like recipes that you're reading online, where you're like, just get to the point. I don't need to hear
Right.
how Nona found all the potatoes on eastern,
Yes.
western facing mountains that get direct sunlight like 1 hour a day. Um, but also I wanted to make sure that the material that we were getting was not so constrained by step one, do this, step two, do that, step five, buy our product, but actually enabling people to build what they needed to. And it's been really cool to see how AI has influenced that. I've helped create conferences for recruiting operations people,
Mhm.
weekly newsletter talking about recruiting operations. And if I say recruiting operations a couple more times, I will summon Beetlejuice.
Well, why don't you? I think it would be good if you define it because I mean you have been in it, and I think there's a lot of organizations that define RecOps very differently. So when I ask you, what does RecOps mean? Give me a definition.
Yeah. So I think my definition for it is there are essentially four main pillars of recruiting operations, five if you want to include employer brand. But essentially, it is the operational elements of recruiting. So let's get the systems up and running. Let's make sure that we've got proper documentation, change management. If you have a recruiting coordination team, that they're aligned on operationally what they need to do. We've
Hmm.
got our programs in an enablement. So we're building your interview skills training, your referral programs. Sometimes we're even building the early careers internship programs. It's covering that piece. Data analytics, because you can't do any of those two things without looking at the data. And if you're close enough to the systems, it's monitoring the data. And then it's the strategic work. It's thinking, how are we going to be getting to the next step that we need to? What got us here is probably not going to be what gets us to those next goals. So how do we play strategically to that? And to your point, every company needs something different from their recruiting operations team. Very easy to come in and say like, oh, here's a playbook and like we're going to run the playbook. But more often than not, what I see when people are like, we're going to go and we're going to do the exact same thing, is there are failure points that this people can't anticipate. And
Yeah.
that's sort of where you start to see cracks in people saying, oh, I don't like my RecOps team, or I don't like my RecOps leader. And it's because you can't handle as many code switching and ambiguous things that you need to be able to do. And the skills that are involved in the role are incredibly diverse.
Hmm.
Because you can't just sort of be good at one thing when you're the rec ops leader. You're kind of the chief of staff to your um, head of TA.
I like that. I like how you position that because, whenever I have asked people about RecOps, they think recruiting coordinator and think that
Yeah.
it stops there. I mean, that is the heart of it. I think you would probably agree, but I love how you said there's data analytics, there's employer branding, there's so much more to a very strong RecOps team. And I know when you and I were talking about the topic today, we wanted to have a little bit of fun, but also address some topics that are near and dear to the RecOp world. So
Yeah.
we're and yeah, we like to walk the line of what's the word, HREs, professionalism. So we're going to have a little bit of fun with that. All right.
Of course.
So let's talk about the first one, and we call this one "What the hell am I doing?" And that was all around skill clarity. So help us understand, why is that a challenge?
And I think that it goes back to something that you brought up earlier in this conversation, which is a large portion of individuals who maybe aren't familiar with how RecOps has evolved
Hmm.
sort of take that mindset of, well, you're just sort of RC plus. And so you get into this spiral of them going, well, we want a strategic leader and we want somebody who can do this and do that. And you come to find out that it's not really as defined as what they need.
Hmm.
And so a large portion of recruiting operations folks end up spending the first 3 months of their role trying to get people to understand that it's not just this tactical function that is, hey, now you're going to let me control the budget and now you're going to let me do this. And I'm not just here to schedule. Um,
Right.
Certainly it's good for your recruiting operator, like your recruiting operations team, to have that knowledge of how does everything work if everything breaks, because you will need to know and understand, like in case of problems, break glass. And like
Right.
if
Yeah.
the ATS breaks, like, do people understand how to schedule manually? Or do people understand like what we're going to do when we need to start writing things? If you have a AI transcriptor and all of a sudden, like your Bright Hire breaks or your MetaView breaks, can you, like, what is the order of operations that people need to know to sort of like turn on the thing? And so the the point of like the skills conversation is you really have to almost take everything that you do and break it down into its sub parts. And then sort of like, I like to refer to it as like that Tony Stark thing where you're sort of seeing the
Yeah.
like split piece and he's,
Multidimensional. Yeah.
yeah, and you're sort of like, okay, we want to pull this in, we pull that in, pull that out thing, and then all of a sudden it works.
Right.
But you have to have that really in-depth ability to break down a problem and understand, is this a system thing or is this a human thing? And a lot of people don't have that ability.
Hmm.
And then a lot of leadership teams that really want to bring recruiting operations people in also don't understand how to grow us. And that's a complication. And I think people sometimes look at that and they go, we've got this person. I don't really know how to grow them.
Hmm.
So instead of doing that, like they'll just say, okay, like you've got to go and be a recruiter now,
Hmm.
failing to realize that the skill set of a recruiting operations person is not necessarily in the recruiting side. Um, I think that having some element of recruiting experience is good because you can
It gives you
understand.
the empathy,
Yeah.
with who you're working with. So definitely.
Well, there's the empathy piece. There's also the piece of like when you make a change in the system, you have to understand what the end user is going to do with it.
Mm. Hmm.
So if let's say you have the ability to move a submit button on your screen and you decide, hey, look, like we're going to move the submit button close to the delete button, you have to understand what the impact of that design decision could be, because now you might get a whole bunch of people who've just started deleting their feedback and they say, why did you put the submit button so close?
Right. Yeah.
You're like, I don't know. So I think that it's important to have people who have done But I think that it's also really important to have balance, because just because you're a really good recruiter doesn't mean you're going to be a really good RecOps person, because what may have made you very successful is the individual relationships.
Hmm.
And what those individual relationships now do is you have to think about how do you take everything and make it a system and
Mm.
system, because you don't have your individualism will screw up your data.
Yeah, it's funny. I always have tremendous respect for RecOps. And it's funny, I'm still very close with three that started out in RecOps, and I ended up bringing them into recruiting because that's what they wanted to do.
Right.
But I can't tell you how many times I would call them and go, I don't know what I did, but I royally blanked this up. I need you to fix it. And I remember one time, his name's Byron. Byron calls me. He goes, "Boo, how did you?" I said, "I don't ask me how. Is it fixed? That's all I need to know. Is it fixed? And how do I not do this in the future?" So there was like this mutual respect. They were fantastic at certain things, and whenever it came to their lane, I respected it because one, I'm not good at it, and two, I had no desire to do it. I can do it, but I don't want to do it for long periods of time. They had a passion about excellence, down to the detail where I'm like, excellence looks good over here. They were looking at it at the detail. And it's funny because you actually, in your first answer on, the biggest challenge is, what the hell am I doing? And skill clarity, you actually went ahead and touched on one of the other challenges, which is where in the hell are we going? And it has everything to do with career paths. So why don't you keep unpacking that?
Yeah, and I think to your point too, it's the one of the really difficult parts in recruiting operations is that your victories are very quiet victories. Your
Yes.
failures are extremely loud. Um, I jokingly make the reference, though I like to stay away from the military. It's like you don't hear about a ton of RecOps successes, just like you don't hear about the CIA maybe being successful.
Uh-huh.
But you're going to really hear about when we screw up and everybody's going to come down on us. And so I think you really have to have some very thick skin in this to like understand. You have to have high accountability. You have to have the ability to analyze where something went wrong.
Uh-huh.
And you have to be able to to think about those things strategically. And I think that to your point about where are we going when it comes to a career path is that you have to figure out how to describe what you're doing that is tactical strategically. Because otherwise, everybody just thinks that you're a tactical function and you're just doing. No one sees how you're connecting all the threads to the strategic values.
Can you give an example?
Yeah. So, like, a really good example of that is, let's say we want to launch a referral program.
Okay.
So, from a level of a referral program, when you break it down into your parts, there's a change management piece.
Mm-hmm.
There, there's a policy piece. There is a strategic piece, and then there's a finance piece. And so, when you think about the change management piece, you have to conduct the trainings for the hiring managers, the recruiters, because you have to tell them how to, like, you're going to get questions about how do we refer people, who's qualified for a referral, all of that. Where do you find that information? How do you do it in the system? You have to train interviewers and everybody at the company how to do that. Most people might say that all of those things are very tactical elements.
Hmm.
But what they're not seeing in that specific thing that's strategic is, how do we roll out comms to the entire company? How does this success of this program speak to the talent acquisition team? How does this position us within the company as a strategic function and not just an order taking cost center? And so when you think about that, you design very differently. You come up with comms very differently. You might bring in the marketing team to help you sort of handle internal comms. You might do things differently. You're going to work with, like, how do you, let's say we both go and we refer your friend Byron, like there's a recruiting operations role open. And
Mm-hmm.
I happen to be talking to Byron and I happen to be the first into the system. But then you go and you talk to Byron, and Byron applies in, or you then go and refer it. Well, I referred him first. So now, because I
That
got,
never happens, though.
oh, it happens
That
all the time.
never happens. Never
No.
happens.
So I referred him first. So in the system, it's going to capture it. And if there's a referral bonus, that's going to go to me. Well, you're going to go, well, wait a minute. I also referred Byron. Why don't I get a referral bonus? So now you got to
Hmm.
figure out, how do you make sure that people aren't unhappy and you in that entire thing. And that's a strategic thing, because you don't want your recruiting team to piss people off.
Right. Right.
Um,
And you've got the candidate experience aspect of it too. You know.
yeah, you've got the candidate experience aspect. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about tactical things strategically and getting people to understand that. Because if you present that as only like, hey, we've got to execute on this, people will only think that it's an execution thing. They won't see the bigger picture. And you have to tie in those bigger picture things for people to understand the strategic value that somebody who is purely thinking about that is thinking about.
So from a career pathing, kind of the where the hell am I going? What advice do you have for someone that's sitting in RecOps going, okay, now what? Where do I go?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I tell this to RecOps people all the time is, like, it's impossible to be perfect in every single pillar that we've talked about.
Hmm.
Um, so find the thing that you really love. And if it's program design and program management, go and try and learn from your program management people out there, network with them, figure out how you can bring your mindset to that, and ultimately figure out, one, how you can apply what they're doing in your work, and how do you position yourself to maybe get into a program manager type role. Similarly, like, how do you move from recruiting onto the revenue side? Um, and because I think what we're seeing right now, especially with the direction that people are trying to push AI
Hmm.
and push what we're doing with AI, there are a couple of ways that it could go, where you see this dispersion of recruiting operations people, where you see a whole bunch of smaller recruiting operations teams executed and all of that. And what we might see there is actually one person might be on for 10 different companies, and you're just occasionally going through and you're just sort of checking your agents and making sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Hmm.
So you're going to see a consolidation there, or you'll see a consolidation there, or you're just going to see very, very small recruiting teams. And so there's a lot of mouths to be fed. And if there are fewer seats, where do you go with your skills and your talents? And you have to
Hmm.
think ahead on that. So
Yeah, but
that's
I
one.
mean, you brought up AI, and I do think that one of the things, if you just look at it at surface level, it's this doom and gloom. However, AI can only execute, and it executes well whenever it understands what your framework is.
Right.
And I think that that's really where RecOps is going to be able to bring a lot of power to AI, and who better to manage the agents in the process and the people who understand the process themselves.
Absolutely. I think that, but I think that right there too, and there are great, fantastic recruiting operators and who are thinking about these problems. I think about Viet Nguyen at Vercel,
Hmm.
who is doing a lot of really, really cool things with AI. Um, and then a couple of other folks who are also doing it that I go in and reach out to whenever I'm curious about stuff. Um, Jason Miller to be one of them too. Is the hard part of that lift is the beginning.
Hmm.
And so, yes, the front part takes a lot of time. And when you do the front part and you do take that time, that's great from a practitioner thing. Maybe later on, you're not needed as much to maintain things because the tweaks that you're making are small. Um, and you just have to make sure that things aren't changing out in a weird way.
Hmm.
So got to make sure your code base doesn't get eliminated when somebody says, I want this thing to be green now.
Right.
We changed our
Yeah.
brand colors. But
Hmm.
that is something that is really interesting. And then also like a lot of the vendors out there are courting RecOps people, which was not something we saw 5-10 years ago either. And I think that slowly started to happen because RecOps people, so speaking to skill and speaking to career path, we've picked up a lot of technical skills and we've picked up a lot of how to talk to each group. And because of that, that's a little different than a recruiter talking to a hiring manager to determine what skills do they need to assess for in a interview to find the right person for the team.
Hmm. All right. So we've got skill clarity, which is a challenge. We just went over career path. We'll throw clarity behind that as well.
Yeah.
So let's do the third one, which has also got some clarity aspects to it, but it's like, what did you call me? And I think
Yeah.
we kind of talked a little bit about it. There's a lack of clarity in the job titles in RecOps. Why is that a challenge?
I think it's a challenge because right now, um, we as a space haven't done a good enough job of coming together to say what should we expect at each level. What skills separate a manager from a senior manager from a director. And a lot of people have either made it longevity,
Mhm.
which to me personally, I don't necessarily think is the best indicator of experience in our space.
Mhm.
Or they have it's just this, it's become sort of this amorphous blob of like, well, we'll just call it a senior manager and add a few more years of experience. You're like, but what is it that makes this? Is it that this person has managed a team? Is it, have they accomplished a product, a specific project? Have they done implementations? What are you sort of expecting there? And I think that because we haven't defined everything at a specific level of what to expect and what you should be seeing, um, recruiting teams are just defaulting to what they would do if they were trying to hire a director or TA.
Yeah. And it's
And
not the same skill set.
not the same skill set. And I'm not saying that like a director of TA who maybe was at a startup who had to build everything out is a poor hire. It's not in some scenarios. But I do think that heads of the people who have been more recruiting focused come in, talk recruiter, and that sits well with the recruiter, that sits well with the head of the department. They know how to talk about it. And then you start getting into the execution phases of what they need to be doing. And you see behavior in the data that just doesn't make sense.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think the whole title issue, it does get into, and I'm so glad you brought it up because so many people will say we want 4 years of experience. Tech is a perfect example. I have seen techs that are maybe fresh out of school, or even some that taught themselves like on YouTube or something else. They went out and did some freelance work and they've got 2 years of experience, and they will outperform someone that's got 4 or 5 years of experience, not just because of their technical skill. But think about a freelance. You're having a context switch. You're having to think through, if you mess something up, chances are you're the one that's going to have to be able to fix it, not QA some off, you know, on another part of the team.
Yeah.
And I just cringe when people go, they've got to have 4 years of experience, because I think that, you're kind of lacking the transferable skills. And I see in RecOps, there's a lot of transferable skills, that could go into operational risk, that could go into, some of the different aspects in operations throughout the organization, because that is a very transcendental skill.
Yeah. And I think that that's one of the things that is overlooked is that recruiting teams often seed other teams in
Hmm.
time of need or even just pure pivots. I know Sam Perlman over at Signal One talked about how business was slowing or something during the example. I forgot how they got there, but essentially they redeployed. They had maybe 10 recruiters. They redeployed 5 to their sales team because those recruiters had said, "Hey, look, I want to learn how to do sales work." And those recruiters learned a new skill. And then when they came back to recruiting, when things picked up, they brought along like, hey, this is a positioning thing. This is how you value sell. This is
Yep.
how you do those things. And I think that that's something that gets lost on a lot of people, is the archival knowledge that can come back to a recruiting team. Um, Recruiting teams don't do a great job of documenting all of that. And if we do,
Hmm.
it's lost the minute somebody leaves. Um, I think the other thing too is, and I say this about my career, the best Excel learning that I got was from a former coordinator who had moved over into marketing,
Hmm.
who sat with me when I was an RC and said like, "Hey, this is how you're going to do this, and this is how you're going to do that." So I learned a ton of that. Some of the best things I've learned about employer brand have been from sitting with people on marketing teams
Yeah.
to do that. And so you learn things and you seed other groups and you make those transitions, and you see it in finance and FP&A, you see it in that. And those people don't forget how hard you have to work.
Hmm.
And so
Right.
they're willing to be like, "Hey, I remember when I was in the mud with you, and these are the things that you can do and you can bring. This is how you're going to show up to a conversation with X leader because I work with them all the time, and they're going to buy in because you say X, Y, and Z."
Exactly. So we've got the what the heck am I doing? What did you call me?
Yeah.
Where the hell are we going?
Yeah.
Now let's talk a little bit more about the future, because we kind of titled this one "Train them and Drain them," like with a
Yeah.
question mark. So, you
Yeah.
know, what did you mean by that being a challenge?
So I think that the challenge here is that right now, a lot of tools and a lot of people are looking at how do we essentially, what is the evolution of the RC group? And I refer to the RC group as the keystone species for
Keystone species.
of recruiting, because essentially, if you start to eliminate, for those who don't know what a keystone species is, it's when this group leaves an area, it's what causes problems. So for example, like the one of the notable cases was Yellowstone. People killed all the wolves, deer population explodes. You find out,
Hmm.
well, actually, the wolves were really good for population control. Let's reintroduce wolves. And that is what we're seeing. What the rhetoric was for the last couple of years was, well, agents will come in and they are going to replace the RC group. And what that turns into is, all right, if you eliminate the RC group, who's learning the next generations? Who's learning that generation who's going to come and backfill for the new one? Who's going to come up with new ideas? Because you've eliminated that position. Who's going to become the new recruiters? Who's going to learn those benefits? And so that is a problem that's certainly happening. We have a problem right now of where do they go? If you already have a team, a lot of them are turning them into flipping it and calling them candidate experience coordinators, where, the scheduling piece isn't 70% of their time. 70% of their time is spent talking to candidates and prepping those candidates, which is now
Hmm.
work that a recruiter doesn't need to do. And the recruiter could then use it to source, use it for that next, maybe 2 or 3 more interviews a day,
Hmm.
because they're not stuck prepping candidates. So that's a way, but I think that also might turn into the new evolution, where when I was coming up as an RC and RecOps didn't exist, it was, you're an RC, you are going to be a recruiter.
Mm. Right.
And
Right.
and there are certainly some folks out there who have said, whenever I hire an RC, I say in 12 months, you have to tell me by like month 3, I'm expecting you to tell me where you want to go and how I can help you get there. And at 12 months, I'm expecting you to be out of this seat.
Hmm.
Um, Jose Kong famously said that at the recruiting operations conference last year. So that is certainly a mindset that some people are keeping, but recruiting coordination takes a lot out of you and it can really burn you out. And you're throwing a lot at people who are either fresh out of school and just learning the role, or
Right.
you're not in a position, maybe your company is scaling so fast, you don't have the opportunity to give them learning opportunities or delegate to them. And so I'm very concerned about what does the evolution of recruiting operations look like if you don't really have people who are doing recruiting operations?
Yeah. And there's there's something to be said that, you know, actually, as a recruiting leader, I loved whenever someone started in rec ops, but they had that drive and that interest and that personality and the acumen to be able to flip. Because in my mind, before I got into HR, I was in banking. You had operations and underwriting,
Yeah.
and then you had those of us that were on, kind of the sales side. And I trained in underwriting for 6 months before I went into sales, and I am so grateful because it helped me not only go out and do the right types of lending, but it also helped me whenever I picked up the phone and called an underwriter and said, we need to talk about your decision. There was some credibility there, you
Yeah.
know? And I think that there needs to be that same type of respect for people moving from rec ops into recruiting. They have a huge base of knowledge. But then again, they can go just about anywhere. But I love what you said about that leader that, in 3 months I want you to tell me where you want to go, and then in 1 year you're out of here. That's pretty bold.
I mean, I do think it's bold. I think that it's an interesting strategy, but I don't love fear-based motivation and tactics. I think that works for a specific group of people.
Hmm.
But you could easily say that to somebody at month 3 or whatever it is, and they could panic. And I think that I don't I think that it's good to set expectations, and I should say this, I'm sure that the conversation is a very different, it's not as like an aggressive, like, I want you out of here in a year.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that it requires a specific kind of mindset to be able to talk about everything that we've talked about now. You have to be able to identify the skills that make you happy. How are you adding to that skill tree? What conversations are you having? What networking things are you doing? What exposure are you getting to people at specific roles? So, like, when I think about my career, there wasn't really a next rec ops person that I was sitting next to,
Hmm.
because either the people I was sitting next to were all of my peers, or the people who were above me in rec ops were sort of still kind of figuring out what they wanted as their rec ops feeling and vibe. So
Hmm.
they're either figuring out, how am I going to manage my team? Maybe they're back to being a new they were a manager, then they went IC, now they're back to being a manager again. Or maybe
Right.
they're a recruiter who sort of stepped into the role during a wartime consigliere type role, and now we're in peace and they don't really know what to do because not everything is on fire anymore.
Hmm.
So you need to be able to give the people the exposure, and if you don't have that experience, you also need to recognize it in yourself as a manager to be able to pass people off to the next one. um I think about when I was managing a team of RCs, and for me, every single one of my one-on-ones included, what have you like, you have said that this is your stated goal. What have you done in the last week to get closer to that stated goal? How can I help you get that? Who can I introduce you to in my network who could tell you more? And I had somebody who started out and said, I want to do program management. I went over, talked to the head of the program management group, and I said, hey, we've been talking a lot, just sort of curious.
Right.
Bring somebody else. Can you take someone in, like, not really an 80-20, but like bring them along, let them ride along for a couple of meetings? Um, and then that person said, hey, I hate program management. I don't want to do it. I said, what do you want to do next? And they said, I want to do data. And I said, okay, cool. And I called up a people analytics person and I said, hey, can you sit with this person and give them your feedback, and what do they need to do? And do they need to learn SQL? Do they need to learn R? Do they need to learn Python? What do they need to do to be successful in this space so that we can get them there and I can give them programs and things that I need them to work on, that I can sort of have them oversee, because I know.
That's a fantastic skill too. To be able to look at some of those parallel job tracks, because just like someone that went and worked in sales and then comes back to recruiting, there's a lot of things that recruiters could learn. I think RecOps is probably the same,
Yeah.
especially looking at the data piece. All right, so let's see. We've got all right. So train them or drain them, but I think we are agreeing train them and then redeploy them is probably going to be
Trainer.
the better, right? So let's talk
Yeah.
about show me the metrics or show me the money, the value proof of RecOps.
Yeah.
How do we go here?
Well, and I've touched on it earlier too, prematurely maybe, but I think one of the things that is very, very hard, and we see this across all of recruiting, is how much is um, where can we tie specific things to specific outcomes? Because
Hmm.
there's so much in recruiting, because you're dealing with the most combustible element on the planet, which is human emotion.
Right. Yeah.
And we're not the same minute to minute. And I think that it can be very difficult to sort of separate what did recruiting operations do? What did recruiting do? What did the manager or hiring manager do? What did the interviewers do? I think this is where we find the crux of the problem with talking about quality of hire, is that quality of hire is really a business metric. It's not a specific metric that can be held by recruiting.
Hmm.
There's so many things that factor into that person and that individual's success. And I think that that's where recruiting operations teams struggle, because most of our metrics for success could be, all right, cost savings. But do you get to a cost saving because you renegotiated a contract? Is that really the best thing? And not everybody's going to be able to get that opportunity to negotiate a contract.
Right.
Is it time metrics? We use time metrics all the time, but how could I say that specifically one thing that recruiting operations did really contributed to the whole thing? Because there might be so many different pieces that we're touching. So is it satisfaction? Well, maybe it is satisfaction, but that could vary from year to year, situation to situation. And so I think that's where we have to figure out, how do we show the value there? And then the other piece that is a struggle is short-term impact, long-term impact.
Hmm.
Because something like, I don't know, building a interview scheduling queue might be a really good solution in the moment, but you're not going to see the impact of that for another year when you
Right.
have this data that you can pull from it to say this was the actual impact. So that's the part where recruiting operations we're still defining everything, and and we have to be able to talk about it. Program impact of our data. How do we tell data stories? How do we tell the right stories? Um, And I think that that's sometimes where some of the struggle can come from, because sometimes recruiting leaders who are like, hey, I want to go in and work on the ops side because it's sexy, because you're working with tools and I'll get to play with AI now and all that sort of stuff. They come in and they start talking about all the things that they've done on the recruiting side without thinking operationally what got them there.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So, you ready for some rapid fire?
Let's do it.
All right. What is a book that changed your perspective on business or HR?
The Book of Five Rings by Musashi Miyamoto.
What is that?
It is Musashi Miyamoto was a samurai, or was a roaming samurai, essentially swordsman. And the way in the Book of Five Rings was
Oh, this is in the 48 Laws of Power.
I believe so.
Yeah, he references it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But
Yeah.
keep going, keep going.
And essentially, like, he discusses how you have to care for everything that you do. And there's essentially how you don't waste any movement or
Hmm.
motion. Economy of motion is something that comes to mind. So I think that's one. You know, Starts with Why by Simon Sinek. I know Luke
Yeah,
Eden is going to
everybody
hate
knows
me for
that one.
saying that.
Everybody knows. You probably get, like, if you did that in an audience, everybody do a hard eye roll. Like, come on with something new.
Yeah.
But the
No,
Five Rings, though, that one is really good. Because I remember Robert Greene in 48 Laws of Power quoted it a couple of times. It was talking about, I think there was one where he was challenged to a duel and showed up late, mocked the guy, and wouldn't fight him. And the guy was just losing his mind and, kind of whipping himself into a tizzy. And then he comes out and attacks, and the guy just knocks him out, like, first shot, And the whole thing about that thing was kind of the motion is, don't feed into somebody else's, use that against them. And it was a fantastic story. So, all right, Five Rings. Um, if I am listening and I'm into RecOps, or maybe I want to get into RecOps,
Mhm.
where can people get involved with the collective?
Yeah. So reach out to me. I'm happy to sit down with you and sort of come up with a plan for what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. I do that all the time. I love mentorship. There is my newsletter.
Mhm.
So that comes out every week on Substack. Um, Also, you will get the invite if you connect with me on LinkedIn. I hate how LinkedIn automatically sends that out. I'd recommend viewing the newsletter on Substack. Um, and then, I will certainly connect you to other people. There are communities that are out there. There are Slack communities that are really, really helpful. Um, yeah,
So where can people find engaged with you? What's the best?
find me on
The big,
LinkedIn.
I was
Uh,
going to say the big blue monster.
Big Blue Monster. Also, my website, my company's website, recopscollective.com. I have a whole knowledge library that I've been building out over the last couple of years.
Nice.
And that is a really good resource to go to when you're trying to figure out what do I need to be doing and why.
All right. So, just as a reminder, we talked about where the hell we're going, what the hell we want to be called,
Yeah.
what the hell we're doing, that we need to train and redeploy, and that if you really want to show value proof, you've got to show the money. So, with all of that, give me a mic drop moment. What can somebody remember if all they heard was the last 2 minutes of this podcast?
If they heard the last 2 minutes of this podcast, uh, RecOps starts with Y. Reach out to me if you've got questions.
Love it. All right. Well, Jeremy, thanks for coming on. And I hope everyone enjoyed this. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you so much again.
Thanks.